All right, we're here with Dr. Kent Chamberlin, who received his PhD from Ohio University, specializing in computational electromagnetics. And he has had years and years of research on cell towers and all of this. I'm not going to go through his whole bio because he's going to tell you about his expertise and what he has found about cell towers. And then Courtney Gilardi, who we've been talking to for, I don't know, well over a year now, in regard to the Shacktown neighborhood and that cell tower that just showed up out of nowhere. And now people have been getting sick and not feeling well from that. So where to begin? There is legislation that's happening in New Hampshire, Massachusetts. There's a move afoot. Dr. Chamberlin, you spoke in Lenox and I believe in Pittsfield, if they let you, in Pittsfield, in regard to the dangers of cell towers, the radioactivity that's emitted from them. So tell me a little bit about this. You know, whenever we have these videos, there are some people who come in and say, "Hey, this is a conspiracy theory. Oh, get on your foil caps and all that." The fact of the matter is, there is real research, and it's really it's not debatable at this point.
You're right, John. And I think a starting point here is to let people know that I'm not here giving my opinions. I'm here representing a commission that was formed in the state of New Hampshire. That commission was formed by a bill that had to pass both houses of the legislature. It was a bipartisan bill, and it was signed by our Republican governor. And so that formed the commission. So this just wasn't a kind of a group of people who are going to make decisions about whether or not 5G or cell phone radiation is good or not. It was a panel of experts. And basically, we ended up with 13 members. We had people with backgrounds in physics, toxicology, electromagnetics, epidemiology, biostatistics, occupational health. So we had people on the commission that were really well qualified to make the types of decisions and make the types of recommendations that we were being asked to make. So we met for a period of a year. We brought in experts, we reviewed the peer-reviewed publications, and we came to the conclusion that cell phone radiation is indeed harmful. So that's a starting point. So I'm going to be reflecting the opinion or the findings of that commission and not just somebody's random opinion.
Right. So there it is. And in the past on this program, Courtney, we've had other experts who have spent decades and decades researching this and looking at it. It's a thing. And now the politicians are starting to do some work because of grassroots advocacy. And it has to be a grassroots process because you are not going to get that push from the industry. In fact, the industry has been deceitful in so many ways. They know it. They know what's happening, but you are going to see, in all likelihood, a push from Verizon pushing back with their alternative facts, to use that term. So this is the process, and this is what's likely going to happen. So people should prepare for it. And if you've been in the world of public service and been an elected official, anytime there's an issue like this, you will see the industry pushing back in order to protect their best interest. Pittsfield, we banned styrofoam in city. The one person that showed up was the lobbyist from the styrofoam industry. Came up from New York City for every single council meeting. Plastic bags, when we banned plastic bags, the plastic bag industry came up, and that was the one person who advocated. In Pittsfield, we decided collectively that spraying for mosquitoes, even though the EPA says it's safe, we had local people who said, no, we don't believe that's the case. And they backed it up with their facts, and there were some changes that were made. So this is a pattern you'll see. And so Verizon and the industry will be pushing back.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, John, because I mentioned that we brought in experts to the New Hampshire Commission. And of all the experts we brought in, all of them were unpaid. They were volunteers, and all of them claimed and demonstrated the harms associated with exposure to cell phone radiation. The exception to that was the one paid consultant that was brought in by the telecom industry. And this person claimed there was absolutely no harm associated with exposure. So yeah, it depends on who's paying somebody. It depends. Of course, I should also note that the commission members were unpaid. They were volunteers. Of course, some of them were serving on Senate, but I don't know if your listeners know that the senators and representatives in New Hampshire are not paid. So they're doing this as volunteers. So it was the volunteers, the experts, who came to the conclusion that there was harm, and you have this one paid expert who says otherwise. I also wanted to mention that
do the math, baby. Do the math.
That's exactly right.
Use your common sense, guys. What's going on here, right?
That's right. Also want to mention that I just to say who I am. During the time I was on the commission, I was the chair and professor in the Department of Electrical Engineering at the University of New Hampshire. So if anything, my bias is towards technology, still is. And that's a sad thing about what's going on, is that if we admit that there is a problem with cell phone exposure, we can address the problem, just like we addressed the problem with seat belts in cars and things like that. So once you acknowledge that the problem exists, you can use technology to resolve that problem, or certainly mitigate it to a great degree.
And to consider those three initial agencies from the government not necessarily doing the best on behalf of the people. Go figure. So Courtney, let's bring it up to date for Pittsfield, because we've had the Lenox conversation also with the Curtis building, but specifically for Pittsfield and for your neighborhood, there was a Board of Health meeting very recently, and as we're recording this, it was last night. We may get this video up a little bit later, but that would be Wednesday night. So tell me about what happened there, Courtney, and where you are in the process.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Dr. Chamberlin, for being here. And last night we had a Board of Health meeting. Board of Health members, Interim Director Andy Camby, Brad Gordon, and Gina Armstrong met with Verizon, and this Verizon, representative as well, to kind of talk about the tower here in our neighborhood and to better understand our concerns. And at the end of the meeting, I think the Board of Health, outright asked, can you take the tower down? Can you remove it? For all of the reasons, right? And we know even before people started getting sick that there were so many issues with, the permitting and the lack of notification, the lack of transparency, the fact that the tower was built through an illegal access point. There was litigation. Verizon continued to build it. We were called collateral damage. And that's exactly how we feel. And I spoke to that last night very passionately. I think it was the first time I ended up in tears in front of the Board of Health, just recalling what it's been like this last year, living next to the tower, and also having to then move away from the tower and see our neighborhood become a deserted ghost town, where we used to have the sound of children playing and laughing and riding their bikes. And now we have for sale and for rent signs. We have people who are sick and people who are in limbo and people who can't afford to move out and have cancer diagnoses. And so Verizon said, we're going to consider it. We're going to talk about it. We're going to have a conversation. And one of the things that one of the board members brought up was maybe finding an alternative location for the tower. And if that could be something on the table, then perhaps it can be removed. We were able, through mapping, to find a location in Pittsfield, 1,640 feet away from any residential structure. We have proposed it. We have offered 2 alternatives to that as well. So we hope that these talks are open and ongoing. And of course, there's urgency because people are being harmed and people don't feel safe. When you hear, Ed Markey say he knows and has known for 20 years that radio frequency radiation is a co-carcinogen and speeds up tumor formation, and you've had a previous diagnosis of cancer, you don't feel safe living in your own home. You don't want to stay in that neighborhood. You don't want to rent a house or buy a house. So, people are leaving and people are stuck. So, we just pray that Farley White, who are the landowners, Verizon, who is the tower owner, with the city of Pittsfield and even the state, because we found out in Dewey Beach, Delaware, I believe, that the state awarded them $375,000 to relocate 11 small cell poles. And I don't even think Verizon knows about it yet, or, it's kind of recent news, but they said, listen, we got to work together and relocate these, find better locations. So I know we can work together to find solutions. There are so many of them. We've talked about them. We just need to enact them.
And so it's good to hear that the Board of Health has been more responsive. Brad Gordon, the chair. I know that Bobby Orsi, a longtime member, is now back on the board. From what I understand, she has been open-minded, which is tremendous. So you're starting to see change because when you present people with the truth and keep hammering the truth, you can't hide from it over time. Eventually, if you keep, and you got to keep at it, and you got to keep at it. And this has been a great lesson in Pittsfield for public advocacy. Unfortunately, we have to go through that process because of the huge money interests that are pushing the agenda, really, in the legislative process and so forth. So, Dr. Chamberlin, tell me about this. We've been using this 1,600-foot framework. Tell me about that and how that relates to the science of this.
Well, I'm creating a video on that right now, and I'm collaborating with other people who are experts in the field to make sure that what we're saying is absolutely correct and will stand up to scrutiny. But the findings are this: if you look at the health outcomes for people who live in this vicinity of a cell tower, and you compare that with the population in general, you can come up with a pretty good sense of how that cell tower is impacting their health. And so if you take a plot, and we've done this, or people have done this in Brazil, and you look at health outcomes as a function of distance from a cell tower, you'll find that people who are living closer to the cell tower have a higher mortality rate than those who are living farther away. It's pretty cut and dried, pretty clear. So that's one criterion you can use, is find that cutoff point, the point where people no longer seem to be affected by the cell tower, and call that the point. And it's beyond 500 meters or 1,640 feet, but it's pretty close to it.
Mm-hmm.
You can also look at results from laboratory studies that show a particular signal level is where you're going to start noticing biological effects, negative health effects, a certain signal level. And then you can ask the question, how far do you have to be from a typical cell tower to have values, signal levels below that? And it comes out to be close to 500 meters. So there are a number of different ways of looking at this that show that 500 meters, that 1,640 feet, is a reasonably safe setback. Now, there's not going to be any perfect answer to this, but it seems to be reasonable. And that's where all that we're trying to do is come up with something that's going to protect people against unnecessary radiation exposure, and yet will still allow us to have the types of communications that we've come to expect.
And what do you keep hearing nowadays? Follow the science. Sometimes the problem with following the science means if it goes against your narrative, and this is our society right now, right? So, but right now there's a lot of interest because there's a perception out there that, if we don't pop the cell tower right here off of Holmes Road, then our calls are going to drop on Holmes Road when we drive through. And there has been a dead zone there. So, perception wise, there are people who use that argument. The fact of the matter is, we've said this for a long time, Courtney, from the very beginning, there's got to be another place where we can put this on the ridge or wherever it may be, so there are ways to do this, and the legislation, Dr. Chamberlin, would certainly help that. Go ahead.
Sure would. Now, one thing I should mention is that my background as an electrical engineer, professor of electrical and computer engineering, has been in electromagnetics. And so one of the foci of what the work I've done has been to perform siting. In other words, if you want to have coverage in a particular area, where do you put the antenna? What type of antenna do you have to use? And from doing work like that over many years, I can look at a site and say, such as your neighborhood, Courtney, and say, no, you don't need the antenna there right in your backyard. You can put it, as you were mentioning earlier, John, on one of the ridges, use directional antennas. It would be far from people and you would get great coverage. What it comes down to is cost. Putting it in Courtney's backyard is relatively cheap because roads are there, access is there, power is there, or very close. But if you
and
go
also
on the ridge,
a landlord is there. So, you know,
Right.
you got to follow the money. All right. So that's
Sure
the other
do.
thing, right? So Farley White certainly has interest in having that cell tower on its property because they make a lot of money from it. So that's another facet.
Well, you're right. Follow the money, and oftentimes the telecoms will go into a neighborhood, and or look at businesses that are under stress, that are not having trouble making it. And so they go to one of those companies and say, "Hey, we're going to pay you, tens of thousands of dollars a year to have this antenna on top of your building." And it's hard for for business owners to say no when that looks like their only way of salvation.
Right,
But
right.
what they
So for
don't know
the
is,
and I'm not sure exactly the ownership for the Curtis building, Courtney, but when you look at that, I mean, these conversations that are taking place, there's a landlord sitting there saying, this is millions of dollars, over time. So,
Absolutely.
or at least hundreds of thousands of dollars, certainly, what the numbers are. But again, it's a big deal. So, this is
And
this is
it's
part of the
fascinating.
process.
It's exactly that. It's a business agreement, right? And it's the Lenox Housing Authority that owns the Curtis. It's the only elderly, disabled, and low income in town. And there's a wait list for it was like 289 or 300 plus families looking to move into the building. And so people were told, if you have a problem with it, you can just leave. And they said, we have no place else to go. But this antenna had been turned down twice before, in about 19 years ago, and then again a few years ago, because of health concerns. But I think they came back and they said, not only are we going to offer you money, we're going to offer you a monthly rent, and we're going to offer you profit sharing on top of it. So now we just go into business with you, right? And so you don't live there, right? The people who are making the decisions, they don't live there. These people are making the decisions, but they're not, like Farley White, the owners don't live there. And the tower is, 4,000 feet away from their actual building. So, they're not affected. And so this is the thing, is people are making decisions about toxic infrastructure in neighborhoods. And we see this as an environmental justice issue, as a health issue. And they're making decisions, but would you want to live there knowing
Well,
all the science?
Well, here's the thing, and let me get to you for a second, Doctor. I mean, I know people who live there and who have put their house on the market and have tried to sell, because of this. And then good luck selling it, right? I mean, because for better or worse, I mean, it's just making the case for it. Well, it's very public. Everybody knows about it. It's not like you're going to trick someone, and nor would you want to, about the fact that this thing is here. So not only are people wanting to get out of the neighborhood because of this tower, but they're having a hell of a time trying to sell their house because of it. So they're in a catch 22, Doctor.
well, one thing that's particularly insidious about exposure to electromagnetic fields is that the symptoms are symptoms that you might just experience under normal conditions. And in fact, you do experience under normal conditions. But let me tell you about what happened in California when they put cell towers on fire stations. And this happened on a number of fire stations. So they mounted these antennas. And by the way, the configuration of the antennas with respect to where people live for those fire stations is very similar to what would be the geometry in the Curtis building. So when they turned the cell towers on these fire stations, within a week of installation, many firefighters developed unusual symptoms of headaches, fatigue, insomnia, memory loss, confusion, nausea, and weakness. And after a time, firefighters in stations with adjacent cell towers were found to have forgotten CPR or became lost responding to a fire in a city they grew up in.
Mm.
I mean, you listen to those symptoms, first of all, they sound very familiar or very much similar to what was experienced for you, Courtney, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. I
so,
mean, we
and
knew,
so, yeah, and so if you were exposed and all of a sudden you started experiencing those symptoms, you might come to the conclusion that, well, it's just I'm getting old and I'm losing my memory because of that, or I drank too
Right.
much last night and that's
This
why
is
I
a
have the
this is a
headache.
different control group right here.
It,
Firefighters, they got to be healthy for their job.
That's exactly right. And there were a group of people together, the firefighters, and they could compare symptoms. If it was just you living in a neighborhood and all of a sudden the cell tower came on and you were getting headaches and getting nausea and all those things that Courtney can tell us about firsthand, you might not associate it with the cell tower. But in the Courtney's case and in the firefighters' case, they knew when the tower came online, and that's when their symptoms started. So this isn't something that's existing in Courtney's heads or in the firefighters' heads. No, this is a very real phenomenon. And over time, if you're experiencing those symptoms, what it means is that over time, other things, other very bad things are happening to your body. So this is real, and we have plenty of documentation, but the cell industry will do a lot to poo-poo those reports and claim that they'll just claim that they never happened.
Yeah, and naysayers will also claim that an entire neighborhood is just full of hypochondriacs. All those firefighters are somehow hypochondriacs. Really, I mean, that's really the argument, because no one's denying that these symptoms are happening. They're saying, oh, it's all psychosomosis, right? So that it must be that, because we knew
Right.
the cell tower was going to go on. So now suddenly we're going to make sure everyone knows that our neighborhood is a non-livable location. No, that doesn't happen.
No.
Nobody wants that. Nobody wants this situation. Nobody's asking for it. So
Nobody wants to be the spokesperson for it. Nobody
No.
wants to be the one to say, hey, listen, this happened and we experienced this. And we didn't know when the tower was going to be on, right? We were begging the city to tell us, like, please just let us know, like, when you treat the ponds and, the swimming holes, you let people know, please don't swim or fish there because we're putting chemicals there. We were like, please just let us know. Like, even when they used to do the mosquito spray, remember they would do
right.
the ring around in Pittsfield and they would let close your windows, don't let the kids play in the yard. We're going to mosquito spray today. And I was like, please just let us know. And I called like Verizon, I called Berkshire Wireless, I called the city. I think that was the other time I cried, I was like, please just let us know. We had no idea. The lights were on, the tower was up, it was flashing. Nobody knew. Well, how do you know if it's on, right? And one day, my 11-year-old came downstairs and she felt headachy, dizzy, and buzzy, and she didn't have a fever. And here we are in the middle of COVID. And so we're socially isolating and we're distancing. We're not going anywhere. There's no summer camps, nothing's happening. And we call Verizon and we find out that the day that she was sick was the day that the tower was what they called fired up, whatever that meant. And we learned that other neighbors had woken up with palpitations and AFib and were feeling similarly. And by December, we knew of, I think, 13 people who were sick. And then what we learned was that people were starting to get these cancer diagnoses. People who had cancer and was in remission of cancer, they were now no longer in remission. And they had fought, as you know, people who are going through this, it's absolutely awful. And you fight for your life. And then to get to a place where you think, okay, I can have some relief. And then it's back again, or it has spread. It's been terrifying. It's been absolutely terrifying. Yeah, you don't want to be the spokesperson for it. But these people who are saying, it's not real. I mean, what are their backgrounds? What are their credentials? Have they studied this for 40 years? Have they looked at the science? Have they done a literature review? And I think this is where this August 13th court decision, where, the entire world
Yeah.
of FCC standards, it completely changed that day with that court decision where the limits for human exposure to wireless radiation was ruled by the Court of Appeals in the DC Circuit that it was arbitrary and capricious, and that there are negative health effects well below the FCC standards. There's neurological effects, there's reproductive effects, there's endocrine effects that have been completely ignored, that the long-term effects of wireless exposure and that the impact to children have been completely ignored. And now these things have to be addressed.
And by the way, we kind of did bury the lead a little bit, because that is a big deal, that August 13th decision. So again, that legally now in the United States of America, there has been now a judge who has said that no, we were wrong, basically, in not so many words, in underplaying or completely ignoring these health impacts. these are real. So we actually have a judge in a U.S. appeals court who has now acknowledged that. Dr. Chamberlin, that case was a big deal.
It was a very big deal, but something people should know listening to this, if they're not already aware of it, is you would expect that we have government agencies in place to protect us against the things that Courtney and her neighbors experienced. And that's the Federal Communications Commission. And that was a huge revelation for us as the New Hampshire Commission looking into this. Why aren't our federal agencies protecting us? And we came across a document, a report, and I suggest anybody who's interested in this, Google the three words, the Harvard, FCC, and captured. Because what you'll come up with is a report from Harvard University that shows in detail how the Federal Communications Commission is captured by industry. It's part of the revolving door where somebody would go to work for industry, for the telecommunications industry. They then go to work for the FCC and then go back and forth. And they get, huge amounts of money for doing this. But what it means is the telecommunications industry is going to get its way in terms of any regulations. So that's the situation where you have people from industry who are now running the FCC. And this is very well documented in that Harvard report. When the New Hampshire Commission found this out, we were, of course, it explained a lot. So we wanted to find out more from the FCC. Is this indeed true? And so we made multiple requests to the FCC to have them send people to talk with us or even to correspond with us. And we got almost nowhere. They would, in response to specific questions, they would either evade the questions or they would say, here, look on our website. We'd go to the website and we would find no information. So our conclusion and what we state in our final report is that this really isn't a scientific question, it's a political one. Right now, the agency that's supposed to be protecting us is captured, and they're not going to rule in the best interests of people's health. They seem to be making rules and regulations that are in the best interests of the telecommunications industry. So the crack in that armor, the chink in that armor that the FCC tends to or has had in the past seems to have been broken. And that goes back to August 13th, when now this court ruling says, hey, you have made these rules, you've completely ignored huge bodies of scientific evidence. You got to go back and relook at things. So that's why there is reason for optimism in this case.
And that's a big deal. And again, it gives you hope that somehow the democratic process can work. And it's no bowl of cherries, baby. This is going against huge corporate special interests with limitless budgets compared to a neighborhood of people here, a neighborhood of people there. Again, those who are, energized by their own situation, but knowing that the work that they do, Courtney, and we've talked about this, is on the benefit of all citizens, because once you get that regulation in place, now you're protecting neighborhoods everywhere. So if Massachusetts moves forward with it, then we don't have to worry about a local ordinance. Hey, it'd be great to have both, no doubt about it. But that's what we're looking at. So if you're able to make the work and make it statewide or even federally, God forbid, then Courtney, then we're protecting more than just your neighborhood.
Absolutely, because we hear that saying a lot, is not in my backyard, right? When somebody wants to propose a cell tower, now we never had the benefit of knowing that it was going to be placed in our side, front, or backyard, depending on which one of the 8 streets you live on. Not in my backyard. That means it goes in somebody else's backyard. And what we realized is we don't want it in anybody's, backyard. These setbacks, these 1,640-foot setbacks, protect everybody equally. And so if you live in a neighborhood called Shacktown, where you may not have financial resources, where And if you look at where the towers are placed in Pittsfield, these are not the most highly resourced areas. And we've talked about this, right? And so these are the areas that you're expecting people like at the Curtis to have to raise money, to raise awareness. These are elderly, disabled, and low income people. And this is a tremendous amount of stress on an already disadvantaged population. So if we can do it across the board equally, and right now municipalities do have the power to create their own setbacks. Great Barrington, Stockbridge, even Lenox has very protective zoning ordinances. But what happens is telecom, that representative, comes into your community and says, you can't be protective because telecom will sue you. And the fear is that if it's a group of citizens who are elderly, disabled, and low income are from Shacktown suing you versus telecom suing you, who do you not want to be sued by, right? And so, making sure that we have protections, robust protections for everyone is absolutely the goal, because at the end of the day, what we're hearing said is it's not my responsibility, right? It's not the city's responsibility to
Right.
take care of the 17 people
Right.
who are sick, to get them into safe accommodations, to perhaps even buy them $30,000 collectively of EMF shielding, bedding, that we know can be effective. There's a lot of, gimmicky devices, right? I know I see you shaking your head, but is there something that we could try in the interim, right, to help protect these, these folks, relocate them into safer housing, perhaps the ones who don't have alternative accommodations. We're very blessed. We were able to, but it's a financial struggle. We're having to pay, utilities on 2 properties and et cetera, and go back and forth, and it's no way to live. But we need for people to take responsibility, because the city permitted the tower. So without the city permitting it, we wouldn't have a tower. You have a landowner who agrees to lease the land. They need to also, there's a stakeholder here. The telecoms need to be stakeholders here. We obviously, people come to expect infrastructure. We need wireless communications, but can we all work together as a community to site it and to place it in ways that people feel comfortable? And that's all we're asking for.
Yeah, and I think the response in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, early on was especially egregious. Yes, generally you see this sort of pushback. Yes, you see this punting. There certainly was punting. There was Pittsfield saying, "Oh no, it's a state issue," and then the state saying, "No, it's a local issue," and so forth. It's not, not our responsibility, as you said. That happened clearly and very publicly in a number of ways, but the complete ignoring of a neighborhood for as many months as this administration did, that's completely unacceptable. At least engage in the process and go from there. Even if you don't like what the neighbors are asking for, they're still citizens and they still have a right to recourse, and to be able to advocate for themselves in a public forum. So that's what's happening. So now we have all these things. We have the New Hampshire legislation we talked about a bit. Massachusetts, where that is, Pittsfield, with our situation, we kind of hit on that a little bit. The Board of Health is having conversations with Verizon. Hopefully you'll be informed and engaged in that process, Courtney, along with the other neighbors. And then there's Lenox. So I guess maybe we can just give a quick update on sort of all of these, because New Hampshire, the commission has made its recommendation. Now it's got to get the legal side of things, Dr. Chamberlin, and get that legislation written.
Well, the next step there is, you're right, is so the way that stands right now is the commission made recommendations, and then a group was formed that was part of that group to come up with legislation that acts on some of those recommendations. Now, you realize that whenever a commission comes out with, it was a list of probably over 20 recommendations, only a few of them are really going to be politically viable. And keep in mind that we're walking a tightrope in writing legislation. You want something that's going to be effective, that's actually going to accomplish something. At the same time, you want something that's going to be, stand a chance of getting voted in a positive vote. And it's kind of hard, because if you ask for too much, it's not going to get voted to a positive vote. And if you don't ask for enough, well, you simply won't accomplish anything. So where we are right now, we've made just a couple of requests in the legislation that we've written. And one of them is a setback, and the other one calls for a state registry, so people can, go to that registry and put down what concerns they have about exposure to electromagnetic fields. And if they're electro hypersensitive, they can make note of that also. So it just gives us a sense, gives the state a sense of how big a problem this is. So that we're asking for two relatively small things. The first one is a setback, as I mentioned. So we've written that. It's now gone to legal. So legal is going to look at this and say, you can't do this or you can't do that. And they're helping us make it into a bill form that can now be voted on. And the next step will be next fall, not this fall, but the fall next year, where it will potentially be voted on. It's not for sure that it'll be voted on, but I just want to give you a sense of how long it takes to get things accomplished. The commission was formed in the fall of 2019, and there's a chance that we'll get something done or some legislation passed in the fall of 2022. So that's 3 years. But our hope is that we have legislation that has some teeth in it, and that it will get passed by the legislature.
And if I'm a town manager or member of the Board of Selectmen or something in a town in New Hampshire, then what I'm telling my town is that we are going to have a moratorium on any cell tower within 1,640 feet until that legislation takes place. That would be the appropriate thing to do, in my opinion, as far as that goes, as far as what a town could do that's controlling these permits. That's fair. And in Massachusetts, probably earlier in the process now, Dr. Chamberlin.
So I have been, the person who could answer that best is Courtney. I'm sorry, not Courtney, you're right here. CC Doucette. She's been very active for quite a few years. And it seems that there have been some stumbling blocks along the way. And you might want to get Cece on the show, because she really can give you an in-depth understanding of where things have been, where they are right now, and where they appear to be going. I have the feeling that she's optimistic at this point, and that's probably all that I really can say.
Sounds good. And then
I should also note that I've been contacted by a number of people from a number of different states, in New York, Connecticut, Maine, Idaho, California. They're trying to put in their own ordinances, and they're relying on the findings of the New Hampshire Commission. So I know that a lot of the states are trying to do something similar to what we did in New Hampshire, and they're meeting with varying degrees of success, depending upon how entrenched the telecommunications industry is in the politics of that particular state.
Yes. And then Courtney, real quickly, to me, it seems like there is no permit yet for the Curtis building in Lenox. It seems like there was a big pushback on that. Where do we stand on that one?
Yeah, right before we had a city council meeting last week, and there was also a planning board commission meeting the same night on September 28th. And literally before we went to go in person to give comments to the city council, one of the planning board members called me up and said, I want you to know we're listening. I want you to know we care. I want you to know that we are doing everything we can to put a big pause on this project. And it was printed in the Eagle the next day. We are putting a big pause on this project until we can learn as much as we can. Because what happens is you get one industry rep or you get one person, and we're going to talk about this in a future podcast with Scott McAuliffe and Daphne Tackover, because I can't believe they've agreed to come on. They're so busy. They were people who were involved in this FCC win. You've already talked to Theodora Scarrato, who is the other one, she's the policy director of Environmental Health Trust, one of the petitioners. But we have a lawyer in Pittsfield that Lenox also hired, who seems to be, even though he claims he's independent, very pro-telecom. So you hear him saying things like radiation doesn't create issues, and that and Ken actually spoke to this, radiation goes out, not down. But when you're talking on your mobile phone, you want the signal to go to your phone. You don't want it to go to the horizon. That would be wasteful, but it says it's so small.
It's got to go down at some point.
It's got to go down at some time. It's got to make the connection with your devices, which also means that it's making the connection with your body. So how can something be so strong that it can create a signal and a connection in here, but not affect our bodies that are biological and also run on electrical impulses? You know, and so Dr. Chamberlain's presentation was able to counter a lot of the misinformation that was provided. And so I think Lenox is saying, listen, we're going to take a pause because we have the person who is rewriting the wireless zoning bylaws also representing the Lenox Housing Authority contract with Verizon, and this is a conflict of interest. So the Attorney General has gotten involved, and they are slowing it down. And that is what Amelia in her open comments called for that night in Pittsfield, which was when we discovered the cell tower being constructed illegally at the end of our street with no notification to abutters. All we did was call for a big pause. And why didn't that happen at that time? You know, we would not be in the situation we are in today. And if we look at Dewey as a role model, there's a quote in the Cape Gazette that says, nothing in the agreement suggests fault or justification. Rather, it removes the monetary impediment to moving the poles. So we need to find solutions and be solutions based. We can find fault and justify all we want, what happened here, there. But at the end of the day, you have people, 17 people who are harmed, people losing their homes, their health, and their financial futures over this issue. And how do we work together to create a resolution? Hopefully Verizon will be a good neighbor. Farley White will be a good neighbor. Maybe the state will kick in. We know it's around $50,000 to do the pole removal. I mean, we even said we'll have a bake sale to raise it if we need it. You know, we're happy to contribute to solutions. We have found 3 alternative locations. We are really praying that our
$50,000 is a small number in comparison to the headache, literally, you know, as far as the health issues, but even just simply property values and ultimately the long-term revenue to the city. I mean, 50,000 is like nothing on the big picture. So, so if we need to move this thing, like I said, I think I said before, like, you know, I would have moved this thing, you know, a long time ago. Find another spot, pop it there, let the numbers shake out how they need to shake out, you know, fight for your position legally and just make it happen. It's just not right. So when something's not right, you got to right the wrong. So, so keep up the good work, and you've shown how democracy can still work. We can still work. It takes a while, but and you got to advocate. But Courtney Gilardi, thank you so much. We're going to keep updating. Dr. Chamberlin, a great pleasure meeting you, and I know you're, and hopefully this will help continue to get a message out there, and maybe you'll get some more phone calls from other neighborhoods in other states, or legislators from other states on how to move forward with legislation like that's happening in New Hampshire, and hopefully Massachusetts soon. So so thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.